The Galactic Empire watched as 3 million humans died, and Earth replied with total war. The moment the final transmission ended, a quiet stillness settled over every chamber where the recording played. No alarms sounded. No speeches followed. Only the calm realization that something irreversible had begun. The Empire had expected outrage or desperate appeals, yet humanity's silence felt heavier than any threat. Observers leaned closer, unsure whether the lack of visible reaction meant restraint, or something far more concerning. Humans were not known for acceptance, and certainly not for forgetting. Their diplomats merely nodded, as if confirming a hypothesis that no one else understood. The Council underestimated the significance of that gesture until strategic patterns shifted across entire sectors. Fleets moved without haste, as if following preparations made long before the tragedy. What came next was not fury but precision, and the Empire finally sensed the cost of its mistake. If you approve, I will immediately. The tribunal chamber aboard Imperial Station Varaxis had been built to impress, though it mostly succeeded at being cold. Polished stone floors reflected the soft violet glow of ceiling sconces, and sweeping arches curved overhead like the ribcage of some ancient creature that had swallowed the entire room. Everything was arranged to remind visitors that the Empire considered itself civilized, rational, and unquestionably superior. At the center of the space stood Instructor Varlin, a tall, plume-crested Korthid whose species took great pride in measured intellect. His posture radiated the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to lecturing less developed species on their limitations. He tapped lightly on his slate as various delegates filed in, each whispering assumptions about the lone human seated on the far side of the room. The human, Lieutenant Mara Hale, waited with her hands resting loosely on her knees. She neither fidgeted nor stared back at the curious assembly. She simply observed, quietly, steadily, like someone who had already accepted the room's judgment but didn't consider it particularly important. A faint hum pulsed through the chamber as environmental stabilizers recalibrated. Most species glanced upward in mild annoyance. Mara didn't move. The difference was small, but Varlin noticed it. Humans always had those peculiar micro-behaviors, little signs of awareness that didn't match their supposed fragility. On the tiered rows above, a mixture of species gathered, the shimmering Kavari with transparent skin, the rigid, armored Vulox who communicated through vibrating plates, the quiet, lamb-eyed Celathi perched like contemplative owls. All of them watched the human with that familiar blend of amusement and curiosity usually reserved for pets performing unexpected tricks. Mara wore standard expedition fatigues, clean, practical, unadorned. Nothing about her clothing suggested danger. Nothing about her posture suggested challenge. And yet the air felt slightly tighter around her, as if the room itself sensed a miscalculation unfolding grain by grain. Varlin lifted his chin. "Let us begin," he said, his tone indicating that this proceeding would be simple, orderly, and predictably unimpressive. It was, of course, the last moment of predictability the room would experience for a very long time. Instructor Varlin activated the central holopole, and a pale blue projection rose like mist shaped into charts. He spoke with the patient authority of someone reciting a conclusion already proven countless times. "Humans," he began, "are a paradox of inefficient biology and surprising stubbornness. Their musculature is dense but imprecise. Their reflexes are respectable but inconsistent. And their evolutionary path," he gestured to a branching web of primate silhouettes, "suggests a tendency toward impulsive behavior rather than refined instinct." A soft ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. The Kavari delegates exchanged glances, their crystalline organs shimmering like kaleidoscopes at a private joke. Varlin continued unbothered. "Historically, humans have relied on brute adaptation rather than sophisticated technique. This is evident in their reaction to stress stimuli, which is erratic at best." Mara's expression didn't shift. She listened as though she were hearing a weather forecast about a distant world where she would never live. The instructor paced slowly, talons clicking against the stone. "Consider their posture responses." A projection displayed humans stumbling through simulated low-gravity environments. "They compensate with instinctive limb flailing. Inelegant. Wasteful. The Volux rumbled with plate vibrations that approximated laughter. Additionally, Varlin said, their decision-making skews toward emotional immediacy. When pressed, humans default to improvisation rather than structure. Admirable, perhaps, but hardly reliable in controlled environments. Mara nodded politely, giving the impression that she agreed with most of it, or at least found none of it distressing. Varlin paused, studying her. Lieutenant Hale, he said, this evaluation is not intended as an insult. The Empire values accuracy. And accuracy dictates that your species, while spirited, lacks the refined stability necessary for high-level interspecies operations. He folded his arms. Even recent events, tragic as they were, illustrate humanity's vulnerability when confronted with overwhelming force. The air grew thinner. Delegates shifted, sensing the reference to the 3 million lost lives. Mara inhaled once, calmly, and waited. No indignation. No glare. Just quiet patience, which only made several delegates lean forward. Varlin concluded with a slight flourish of his crest. Thus, today's demonstration will show the difference between instinct. He inclined his head toward Mara. And true discipline. No one expected the human to respond. No one expected her to challenge the lecture. And yet the silence she held, steady and unblinking, unsettled the room far more than any argument would have. Something in her stillness hinted that the Empire's assumptions were not merely flawed, they were incomplete in a way no one had bothered to imagine. Mara waited until Varlin finished his practiced cadence of superiority. Only then did she lift her gaze, calm and thoughtful, as if she were examining the shape of a puzzle rather than a lecture aimed squarely at her species. "May I ask something?" she said. Her voice was soft, measured. The kind that didn't interrupt but quietly rearranged the room's expectations. Varlin allowed a polite nod. "Of course, Lieutenant. Clarification is welcome." Mara looked at the hollow projection of stumbling humans. "You said our reflexes are inconsistent. Based on what sample size?" Varlin blinked. 500. She tilted her head. "Urban or rural backgrounds?" A few delegates exchanged puzzled looks. Varlin cleared his throat. "The data did not categorize that distinction." "I see." Mara's tone carried no judgment, just an inquisitive neutrality. "And the gravity acclimation tests, did the subjects receive prior instruction?" Silence tightened. "No," Varlin admitted. Mara nodded again. "So you measured first attempts under unfamiliar conditions." She paused. "Would you consider that a reliable metric?" A Celathi scholar in the second row tilted its lamp-like head, feathers fluffing with academic interest. Varlin frowned. "It provides baseline behavior." Or, Mara offered gently, "it provides panic patterns for individuals who don't yet know what to expect." A subtle ripple moved through the chamber. Delegates shifted uneasily, not because she challenged the data, but because she did it with surgical precision and no visible irritation. The Celathi leaned forward. "Instructor Varlin, her point is valid. Baselines require controlled familiarity." Varlin's crest twitched. "Human improvisation complicates consistency." "Improvisation," Mara murmured. "Or adaptation?" The distinction hung in the air. Even the armored Volux paused its plate rattling. The Kavari dimmed their bioluminescence, as if processing the implications. Mara folded her hands again, her expression unchanged. "Forgive me," she said, "but if today's demonstration is meant to measure stability, shouldn't the conditions reflect actual human behavior rather than assumptions of instability?" It wasn't argumentative. It wasn't defensive. It was simply reasonable. And that reasonableness carried a quiet threat. If the Empire's foundation was flawed, what else had they built on sand without noticing? For the first time, Varlin hesitated. The hierarchy of the room bent, just slightly, toward the human. Instructor Varlin recovered his composure with a small exhale, then activated the chamber floor. Panels shifted, revealing a circular platform surrounded by stabilizing rails and tracking sensors. The air shimmered as the gravity field reset to 0.18 standard, light enough to confuse anyone unprepared, steady enough to expose technique. "This," Varlin announced, "is the Empire's standard balance assessment. Developed over 3 centuries. Perfected by species with exceptional motor refinement." His crest lifted confidently. "I will demonstrate." He stepped onto the platform with elegant motion. His limbs adjusted in smooth arcs as the low gravity pressed gently against him. He glided forward, pivoted, and completed a flawless sequence of controlled turns, each movement crisp and almost ceremonial. The delegates applauded with subtle gestures, light pulses, plate vibrations, melodic chirps. "Precision," Varlin said, stepping down. "Now representative attempts." First, a Kavari joined the platform. Its translucent limbs sparkled beautifully but wobbled with every shift. The creature regained balance only through frantic shimmering. Next, a Velox climbed up. Its armor plates clacked like mismatched shields. It managed 3 seconds upright before tilting sideways, sliding gingerly off the platform with a grunt. A Celathai floated in, feathers trembling, managing a surprisingly graceful start before spinning too quickly and clamping onto a rail for dear life. Each attempt ended with polite embarrassment. Varlin gestured toward Mara. "Lieutenant Hale. Your turn." Mara rose without hurry. She stepped onto the platform like someone stepping onto a familiar porch. No theatrics, no deep breath, no stance adjustment. The gravity shift lifted her slightly, but she responded not with tension, but with a natural, almost absent-minded correction of her shoulders. Then she moved. No flailing. No learning curve. No hesitation. Mara glided across the platform with a smooth, deliberate flow, her feet barely grazing the surface, her center of gravity impossibly stable. She turned her hips, rotated effortlessly, then drifted backward as if gravity itself had politely made room for her. The room went silent. She lifted one leg, extended an arm, and held a perfect balance, calm, relaxed, almost casual. Then she pivoted into a controlled spin, stopping herself with a gentle countermotion that looked more like dance than physics. Sensors chimed. Highest score recorded in 117 years. Mara stepped down as if nothing unusual had happened. The chamber did not breathe for several seconds. Even Varlin stared, crest lowering a fraction, not in humiliation, but in the bewildered recognition that something fundamental had been miscalculated. Mara dusted non-existent debris from her sleeve. "Was that acceptable?" Her tone was polite. Her performance, however, was a quiet declaration. Humans did not need to match alien technique. They had invented their own. The silence lingered long enough for the station's ventilation system to become the loudest thing in the room. Delegates exchanged glances, each trying to calculate how a species known for clumsiness had just outperformed 3 centuries of refined instruction. Varlin blinked twice. "Lieutenant, that level of balance is atypical for your species." Mara shrugged lightly. "Not really." A Celathai scholar leaned forward, feathers rising in academic alarm. "Explain the movement." "There was artistry." Mara considered the platform behind her. "It's probably from childhood, mostly." "Childhood?" Varlin repeated, as though she'd said she learned it from clouds. Mara nodded. "Playgrounds. Climbing frames. Rope courses. Balancing on fences we weren't supposed to climb." She paused. "Also falling." Repeatedly. The Kavari emitted a sharp crystalline chime, the equivalent of startled disbelief. "Your younglings practice controlled falling?" "Not intentionally," Mara said. "But we do a lot of it." Varlin tried, and failed, to hide his confusion. "You are suggesting that the reason you excel at a precision gravity assessment is because your species habitually allows its offspring to topple from elevated structures?" "Pretty much," Mara said. A Velox rumbled, plates vibrating in bewildered concern. "How do they survive this?" "We don't always," Mara admitted with a mild smile. "But we get better at not repeating the mistakes. Humans are big on iteration." The Celathai's feathers puffed even further. Iteration through traumatic impact? Through play, Mara corrected gently. You know, jumping from rocks, rolling down hills, trying to walk along thin rails, climbing trees taller than our houses. She looked thoughtful. Oh, and sports. That probably contributed too. Sports? Varlin echoed, as if learning a new dangerous word. Running on uneven ground. Dodging impacts. Colliding with other people at high speeds. Sometimes intentionally. The Kavari dimmed in horror. Your recreation involves bodily collisions? Frequently. And children participate? Definitely. The entire room shifted back, collectively reevaluating their understanding of humanity's baseline. Mara continued, oblivious to the rising dread. Plus there's balance training from childhood games, like spinning until you can't see straight, then trying to walk in a line. The Celathai made a small, distressed clicking noise. Voluntary disorientation? Sure. It's fun. A wave of logical horror rippled through the chamber. Varlin finally spoke, voice quieter. Lieutenant, your species engages in activities that would be classified as hazardous conditioning. Mara shrugged again. We just call it growing up. The room fell into stunned contemplation. No one laughed now. No one dismissed the performance as luck. The realization sank in quietly, steadily. Humans had not trained for this test. They had prepared for it by accident, through an entire childhood of organized chaos. And suddenly, the Empire's assumptions felt much smaller than they had an hour before. 3 months passed. Instructor Varlin incorporated several of Mara's insights into his curriculum, quietly, cautiously, and without announcing the source. The delegates who had witnessed her demonstration spoke about it in hushed tones, as though describing a natural phenomenon they still didn't fully understand. Mara attended the station's joint training program daily, moving through drills with the same calm precision she had shown on the platform. She corrected no one. She boasted about nothing. She simply existed with a steadiness that kept unsettling whoever observed her for too long. Then the emergency struck. It began with a tremor, small enough that most species ignored it, large enough that Mara froze mid-step. The overhead lights flickered. A deep thud vibrated through the station's hull like a muffled heartbeat. The alarm followed. Hull breach detected in Sector 9. Decompression in progress. Structural compromise severe. Panic spread instantly. Kavari shimmered wildly, their crystalline bodies fracturing light in sharp, anxious bursts. Celathai scrambled to anchor themselves, feathers flattening in terror. Volux braced against the walls, plates clattering in distress. Mara was already moving. The corridor ahead split into 2 paths, left toward the evacuation route, right toward the breach. Every other species surged left. She turned right. Air screamed past her as she entered the destabilized wing. The pressure drop pulled equipment down the corridor, slamming debris into walls with lethal force. Mara tucked her chin, rolled under a spinning metal panel, and pushed forward with precise footwork, exactly the kind of movement the Empire insisted humans were incapable of learning. Sparks rained from a torn conduit. A Celathai clung desperately to a handrail, talons slipping as the vacuum dragged it toward the fractured bulkhead where atmosphere bled into space. Hold on! Mara called. It wasn't a shout, just a calm instruction delivered with absolute confidence. She timed the corridor's pressure pulses like an athlete reading the rhythm of a storm. When the drag lessened for half a second, she launched forward. Low gravity, fluctuating pressure, conditions that should have been fatal, became something she navigated with practiced intuition, the same ease she had shown on the demonstration platform. She reached the Celathai, braced her boots, and hooked an arm around its torso. Got you! The next pressure wave hit. Mara absorbed it by dropping her weight, rolling into the wall, and using her body as a shield. Human joints, so often mocked for their inelegant design, flexed through angles the Empire had never accounted for. She locked her grip, stabilized her breathing, and pulled the Celathai down the corridor with efficient, unhesitating steps. Behind them, the hull fracture widened. Metal peeled outward like a blooming flower. Another shockwave threw a Kavari spinning toward open space, luminescent body flickering in panic. Mara didn't think. She pivoted, planted a foot on the corridor wall, and pushed off. Momentum carried her through drifting debris. She caught the Kavari's forelimb just as the vacuum yanked him toward the breach. Her arm strained. Her shoulder burned. But her grip held. She redirected the force into a controlled slide, carrying both of them into a recessed maintenance alcove. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, but she kept both aliens anchored. Stay low. Stay still. The corridor groaned as emergency bulkheads attempted to close. One jammed halfway, shuddering against twisted metal. Mara lunged toward it. She slammed her shoulder into the panel, forcing it downward. The mechanism protested, sparks hissing along its edges. She pressed harder, slow, steady, using her legs more than her arms. Human joints popped, muscles strained, but inch by inch the barrier lowered. The wind stopped. Silence rushed in like a blessing. The bulkhead sealed fully, locking the compromised section off from the rest of the station. Only then did Mara breathe out. The Celathai stared at her through wide, trembling eyes. How did you do that? Mara sat back against the wall. Grew up in a coastal town, she said, voice calm. Storms. Riptides. High winds. You get used to reading pressure shifts. The Kavari blinked in crystalline astonishment. You learned spatial survival from weather? Pretty much. She pushed to her feet and offered them both a hand. Come on. Medbay's 2 halls down. As they walked, the intercom crackled. Structural collapse contained. All sectors stable. Human Lieutenant Hale credited with breach response. Delegates across the station paused mid-panic, listening as the report detailed how she had stabilized a corridor that should have claimed dozens of lives. Instructor Varlin listened too, crest collapsing slowly in awe, and something like respect. For the first time, the Empire understood something fundamental. Human adaptability wasn't improvisation. It was preparation the galaxy didn't know how to measure. The medbay lights glowed soft and even, casting a pale warmth over the controlled chaos that followed the breach. Technicians hurried between diagnostic tables. Crystalline shards from trembling Kavari still glinted on the floor. Celathai feathers drifted through the air like shed thoughts. Mara sat on the edge of a medical cot while a scanner hummed over her shoulder. The medic, a careful, long-limbed realm, studied the results with a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration. No fractures, it murmured. Considering what you did, improbable. Mara offered a tired shrug. We're built sturdier than we look. Instructor Varlin arrived in the doorway, his posture noticeably altered. His crest, once lifted with practiced superiority, now settled low in acknowledgement. He hesitated before approaching, which in Korthid culture bordered on an apology. Lieutenant Hale, he said, your actions prevented significant loss of life. Mara glanced at him, expression steady. I did what anyone would have done. Varlin shook his head. Incorrect. No one else could have traversed that corridor without emergency gear. Your reflexes, your judgment, your methods were beyond the predictive models. The Celathai scholar, perched nearby with bandaged wings, chimed in softly. Her movement through the pressure waves matched a platform demonstration. The same controlled freedom. But applied under lethal conditions. Mara didn't respond. Varlin drew closer, lowering his voice. I have reviewed your earlier explanations. The childhood conditioning. The collision-based recreation. The unstructured environmental exposure. His crest twitched in a gesture that might have been humility. It appears we misinterpreted chaos as randomness, when in truth your species uses it to calibrate instinct with remarkable efficiency. Mara smirked faintly. We call that growing up. Yes, Varlin said, tone almost reverent. And we have much to learn from it. He tapped his slate. A new training sequence appeared, fluid, adaptive, unpatterned, unmistakably human in origin. I would request, Varlin said, that you assist in updating the Empire's emergency response manuals. Your techniques could redefine our approach. Mara folded her arms loosely. I'm no instructor. You are, Varlin replied. Exactly what an instructor should be. The room fell quiet. The Kavari she had saved approached slowly, luminous body dimmed in gratitude. Lieutenant Hale, your actions were not instinctive improvisation. They were practiced survival. Its voice chimed, would like to understand. Mara inhaled softly, as if weighing the request. I can help, she said at last. But I'm not giving lectures on human supremacy. I'm just sharing tools. Varlin inclined his head. Logical. Tools are what allows survival. A faint smile touched Mara's lips. Exactly. Outside the medbay window, the station drifted in silent orbit, scarred, stabilized, and deeply changed. Officers reviewed footage of the breach response with growing disbelief. Analysts replayed Mara's movements millions of times. A dozen species began rewriting assumptions once thought foundational. There was no triumph in Mara's posture. No theatrical pride. She simply sat with quiet composure, the same calm neutrality she had shown from the start. But the galaxy had shifted around her. Humanity had a way of doing that. Moving through disaster with an ease that felt accidental, until others realized it wasn't. Or the others left, the faint hum of medbay monitors filling the quiet. He seemed to be searching for a final question, something that might close the gap between what the Empire believed and what they had just witnessed. Lieutenant, he said slowly, I don't understand how your kind does this. How you turn unpredictability into mastery. How you walk into danger with such calm. There must be a reason your species responds the way it does. Mara slipped off the cot, rolling her shoulder to test the restored joint. There is, she said. Varlin watched her with sharp, analytical eyes. And what is that reason? Mara paused at the doorway. Not dramatically. Not with flourish. Just a simple, thoughtful pause, like someone deciding which small truth to offer. She glanced back, expression steady, voice quiet enough to make him lean forward to catch it. We adapted to a world that never apologized. Then she walked out, leaving the instructor and the Empire, wondering what else they had misunderstood about the species they thought they could measure.